Hi, everybody. This is Bob Loram, Chief Marketing Officer with Celerity. I wanted to welcome you today to our webinar entitled The Future of Distributed Energy Resources, Meeting Electricity Demand to Sustainability. So again, I'd like to welcome you all. We got people kind of coming in right at the moment, but we're going to cover 5 or 6 main topics today with a couple of our speakers, all of which are really important as it relates to DER, otherwise known as distributed energy resources. So we're going to talk about the market transformation. What is it? How is it transforming and changing as the world evolves into this new energy-driven world that we live in? Defining what DER is and the need for complying with it or applying it to your utilities practice. Also talk about some of the key players that might be involved in a DER exercise, the architectures, the maps, and some of the interoperability between these different systems and people and technologies. Really important. We'll also talk about the role that the utility organization plays because you guys are really the ones that are really being impacted by this the most. And we'll show some examples of some utilities and how they've worked with DER at their organizations. And then also we'll just kind of end up with a little bit about Celerity's expertise in conducting DER projects with clients and the processes we follow that really make us stand out from the competition. As the webinar progresses today, if you have any questions, make sure to just pose them in the Q&A chat box during the show. And what we'll do is we'll answer those at the end of the event to keep the speakers on track with their content. Also, during the event, we put together a real simple 2-question anonymous survey that you can take during the event or right there directly after. I'll put the link in the chat box so you can actually click on it and take it. It only takes about 15, 30 seconds to ask a couple questions about DER as it relates to your organization. Then lastly, tomorrow, probably around noon Eastern time or so, we're going to send you a link to our post-webinar landing page where you can access today's slides, the recorded webinar so you can share with your friends, families, and colleagues, and then also a quick survey just to let us know how we did and maybe even talk about some additional topics. Okay? So with that, a little bit about Celerity. For those of you that may not be familiar with us, I'm going to spend 30 seconds or less on this. Essentially, this is our positioning statement in the market. We are a risk optimization company that helps public utility organizations essentially transform complex data and field ops into precise, actionable intelligence to help you achieve 3 things: mitigate risk, optimize your assets in the field or on your computers, and to maximize overall product results. We're broken up into 3 different divisions: utility, vegetation management, and digital litigation services, of which we're focused today primarily on the utilities consulting division. In short, you wrap all these things together. What we really do, we're the people behind the power. We help empower organizations like people on this show today with the power that they distribute. So that's a little bit about us. So let's talk a little bit about our speakers today. So we're joined by 2 experts in the field of DER. One who is a third-party subject matter expertise named Rish Gadekar. He works for an organization, CEO of a company organization called Lara, and also is a trusted advisor to Celerity on both DER and other utility practices that we do. He's got a ton of experience in energy sustainability, grid integration, electric vehicles, and distributed energy resource technologies. So you're in really good hands with Rish joining us today. He'll be doing about 90% of the talking from his expertise in the field. So I want to let you know, he also played significant lead roles at some really big corporations, including General Motors, EPR Institute, and the United States DOE's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. He's also joined by Tony Marabi, who is the VP of our entire utility consulting division at Celerity. Tony has a team of people working with him on DER and other things that we do here at Celerity and the consulting group. And he's got 35 years of experience in a lot of major operational and leadership roles, primarily at Pacific Gas and Electric, and also has played, as you can see on the screen here, multiple different titles relative to operations, maintenance, tech deployment, enterprise strategy, et cetera. So you're in really good hands with both of our speakers today. So with that, I'm going to go behind the scenes until the end of the show. Rish, if you'd like to take over and do your magic.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that excellent introduction. First of all, I'd like to start by thanking Celerity for having me here and conducting the study that I'm going to be presenting to you. I'm excited about that. And more importantly, thank you all from the utility and the grid sector or the private sectors, anywhere else you're joining from. It's a pleasure to kind of have you on this webinar. So when we tailored this presentation, we looked at from the lens of one very important audience. For me, audience is very critical, and that are utility and grid operators, right? Particularly within the utility and grid operators where you are, people who are involved in modernizing the distribution system, and the energy resources that fit within the distribution systems, what we call our distributed energy resources. You will hear this term DER extensively during this webinar, and that's the focus of this particular presentation today, and how the DERs can be of value to the electric utilities as well as to the grid and the consumers. We looked at from the lens of three key audience within the utility and grid operators. One are the utility professionals, those who are planning and operating the electric grid, modernizing the electric grid, looking into IT/OT systems, planning for DR or virtual power plant services, and how utilities, one of the key objective goal is improved customer services. Also from the lens of, although distributed energy resources as it self-stands, it's on the distribution side of the grid, you cannot discount the ISOs and RTOs, the independent system operator or regional transmitter operators, including the private sector, who provide extensive amount of technology. One is, what we do on distribution grid impacts the transmission generation side, so that becomes relevant. And the utilities, as we all know, are using extensively the technologies that are provided by the private sector. When we talk about the meter data management systems, automated metering infrastructure, or even distributed energy resource management systems, those are a very extensive collaborative partnership that happened between the private sector and utility. So this is going to be relevant to some of those as well. One particular set group of utilities, we look from the lens of information and operational technology experts, what we call IT/OT systems. I think we talk, those would be immensely benefited from the content out here and some of the work that we do here, particularly looking at from reliable and resilient operation of an electric grid. So with that in mind, we have tailored today's topics across these, 6 very key, or 5, and then of course the 6th one is question and answer session. One is looking from the context. What is distributed energy resources, and introducing DERs, right? So, one of the things that I see that most of you could be from the utility and may know what the distributed energy resource is, but also looking at it from the lens of where are we coming. DER is a very loaded term. It can be very misinterpreted. What angle are we looking at? So you kind of get a context of where we're coming from. We also look at from the lens of what value of the DER and utilities. So you'll hear some of the value streams that the DERs can provide. Some of those things you may have already heard, and some of those things that we have done extensive studies to really identify new opportunities that the DERs can provide, particularly with where the growth is and where the investment opportunities are happening with the DERs. And then we will touch upon applications. It's not just about what DERs are and where the opportunities are, but how is DER being applied across the utility, driven by particularly the market and regulatory forces, with some specific examples within states and some utilities that are employing DERs. With that, then we'll just drive real quick into some of the capabilities that Celerity brings in the DER space, and then we'll try to pause for 10-15 minutes at least for Q&A session. So please have your Q&A ready or send them in the chat, as you can see, as whenever you remember those questions during the slide. And I also like to make a pitch again on the survey questions that Bob would be posted. It shouldn't take more than 30 seconds for you to quickly answer, but it really helps us get insights from you to help provide better services. So thank you in advance for your questions as well as the survey responses. So in terms of setting in the context, I always like to start with the guiding policy. What can DERs do for the utilities, right? This is it sets the stage of what we're going to be talking about for next another 45 minutes or so. What we are seeing are DERs are critical components Okay, it's not just about what is happening in the grid in the past and now. It's also where we think DERs fit within the future of the grid. And one of the things that I'm looking at from the lens of, question always came to me was, hey, what is the role of DERs, particularly things like solar, electric vehicles, with the administration changes that we're seeing, nationally. So I would like to separate that with respect to the market and regulatory forces away from the politics. So if I to believe in any technology or any change needs to happen, it has to be driven by the market. It has to be driven by the utilities need to have DERs. So we are looking from that lens. And as I mentioned, we are focusing on DERs, but also we are focusing on the U.S. grid more, and U.S. policies more. In case we do see somebody participating internationally, some of this could be relevant to you, but the Taylor presentation is mostly focusing on the U.S. Utilities and grid operators. The second area is very important, where we only look from storage from hardware or a car charger, a PV system, but also data and integration of the systems, right? So when we look from the visibility and management of a grid is very, very critical, visibility and control, right, from utility. And those in the past, traditionally those controls have been from the centralized generation. If you have DERs, what does it mean from how utility operates a business? The third one is looking from the new management systems that are necessary, an evolving business model that are very required, the innovation that is necessary, and then the staffing. A lot of times we think that the problem can be solved, but the staffing and the expertise is a critical gap that we need to address. And we look at from that lens as well. So the question that we were trying to originally start with is, will utilities adopt with DERs? But the question we ended up saying is, and what's more important for us to look into is, how will utilities adapt to this emerging world of DERs, and how it can be an integral part of an electric grid. So that's how we kind of reframe the question and thinking, and how the future might look like from our lens. So let's start with the big picture, some of the great challenges that needs to be addressed, irrespective of how it is being addressed. What are some of the challenges? You may have heard about some of these challenges, but I have picked the 4 that I think are very critical. And from my lens, I've worked for almost 25 years in just the space and nothing. I don't know anything else other than this, and I'm good at it, right? So, but in terms of what does it mean that the challenges are being faced at the grid currently, one of the biggest one I see is the growing demand and peak load management. The peak load management, for example, has existed extensively for many years. In California, when I started, developing technologies for automation of demand response and managing the peak load, it used to be managing peak summer load due to the air conditioning load. Now the peak has shifted to the evenings when sun goes down and the wind hasn't kicked up due to the large renewables in the grid. How do we manage evening peaks? The intent is still the same on managing the peak, but the timing of that has shifted. And we're also seeing a tremendous growth in demand more recently than we have seen in the past. Traditionally, we would be very happy with 1.2% growth in the demand, but now we're seeing anywhere from 2.5% range, and it's a global phenomenon, and even more regionally, which we'll touch upon in a little bit, primarily driven by things like data center energy use, electrification driven by transportation sectors, as well as building electrification. The second and the important challenges that I think are becoming important, and it all depends on the utility and the region that you're coming from, is renewable energy or more sustainable technology or carbon-free technologies, what we call is solar and wind technology, right? How do we manage their grid more reliably? And the grid stability that the renewables pose challenges, particularly with the intermittency, and how DERs can potentially be of value in terms of the adoption from the customer. Looking from the third angle, which is also equally important, from the modernization, right? So as we start seeing the load growth, the traditional substations or transformers feeders that were designed needs upgrade, whether it needs upgrade for adding more sensing capabilities to get the data and integrating them with utility systems, but also expanding the throughput and the hosting capacity of the critical grid infrastructure. That all updating that outdated infrastructure can lead to grid management challenges. And then we are seeing that even more challenged by the extreme weather events and regulatory interventions that are happening in certain states, because we do know that the electricity is a critical infrastructure, and a lot of times the regulated side of electricity infrastructure intervenes for, of course, from the lens of the customer as well as the reliable grid service. But how does a utility prepare and manage this challenge? And the last one is, again, something very new, and a lot of people don't look, and that is subject matter expertise and staffing shortages. And for all of these, we do have some data that we'll walk through that we have seen, particularly as the aging workforce retires within the utility. How do we address the skills gap, but also in a competition that the utilities face with the technology sector, as the expertise come close from the IT industry itself and the information technology, OT technology skills that the utilities lead, how the competition for that talent and what some of the gaps that could be filled. So all of this leads to eventually the challenges are basically the means all of those. The end is for the utilities is to make sure that the grid is reliable, electricity service is provided in an affordable way and in a sustainable way. So continuing those major three objectives, there could be others as well, but looking at it from the lens of these three major objectives, what are the grid challenges and how we can address the grid challenges, particularly looking from the DER's perspective. So let's jump into DERs, right? Again, DERs is a very big term. Everybody sees it in a very different way. I would like to start by looking, how are we looking at DERs, right? The way we look at it in a more simplistic definition, again, I don't want to reinvent the definition, but I try to simplify that as much as possible, is an energy resource connected to grids distribution system. I think there are two very important terms here to understand. The first one is it's energy resource, and the second one is connected to the distribution system. Okay, and that's what we call our term distributed energy resource. Some of the examples of DERs that can be included is your distributed generation, solar PV, right? The second is energy storage. Energy storage could be a source or a sink. It's a load when it's drawing electricity and charging. It's it could be an energy resource, a generation resource when it's feeding the power back to a home or building or back to the grid. The third one is where, it's one of my favorites in terms of demand response. Virtual power plant services are pretty, demand response has been there, but how the demand response operate, what kind of end users are there to provide those services is a very interesting, DER technologies. And then finally, in the area that I have worked very extensively in after demand response is in the electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure, right? So when we look at from that lens, we look at from the DERs can be either on the two levels. It could be grid-sited or it could be customer-sited. A lot of times the customer-sited ones are called behind the meter. I like the term customer-sited than behind the meter. It depends on the definition of a meter. And then on the grid-sited, which is in front of the meter, what a lot of traditional utilities may call it as. And all of these things needs to be brought together, coordinated together. And that's where the IT/OT systems and the DER systems play a very critical role. So we're looking at from that three lens, the grid-sided side, the customer-sided side, and coordination engagement of the DERs that we see here, and how this DERs can provide that opportunity from the lens of the growth and the lens of the promises that the DERs can provide from the traditional, status quo that is being used. And at the same time, why is it such an underappreciated part of the energy system that could be leveraged extensively as we move forward? So let's look at from the, lens from what we call it as the role that the DERs can play, particularly for the utilities, the value that the DERs can provide to the utilities. right? One of the few of the things that we extensively analyzed and look at the utility, and it comes from not only just from the quantitative data, but also qualitative applications of my experience in reviewing it. What I'm seeing is utilities find it complex at sometimes in planning and deploying and managing these assets, both from the grid side as well as the customer side, and how do we ensure those could be taken care of. But we also understand, DERs can represent opportunities depending on which utility you are, which region you are, and what regulatory intervention you have. That represents a tremendous, fastest growing part of the energy systems that we need to be looked at as well. And the third, which is utilities not so much used to, is the integration of the IT and OT technology, right? Systems, which is all required for efficient operation of the terms. Like distributed energy resource management systems, distribution management systems like DMS, etc. What does it mean in terms of that integrated information IT, OT technologies? So that I think all of these are some of the key value that we think that the utilities can leverage. When we talk about the value, I'd like to highlight one area that which my team done extensively when I was at Electric Power Research Institute and EPRI. Some of you might be the members of EPRI as well, and I might have worked with some of the programs called, Program 161 or 174 for DR integration, information communication technologies, which was a program, by the way, I used to lead while I was at Electric Power Research Institute. Looking from that lens, where we start thinking about what are some of the IT and OT systems that the utilities have. So if you look at from the one set on the purple, right, on the top left corner there, those are mostly the IT systems. So if you look from the pink on the bottom right corner there, those are mostly the operational technologies. Both are equally important, and their integration and delineation becomes very critical from data security and cost efficiencies. Okay, so an example I can give you is, take an example of business and the customer data. So traditional utilities do need to operate a business, right? And then also you have to manage a tremendous amount of grid and customer data. So you have ERP and CRM systems, right? So those systems become a system of record. So in the IT, there are two very important terminologies that become important: system of record and system of management. System of record are those which are the source and the truth of a particular data. System of the management are the ones that use that data to manage certain business objective. So looking from the lens of how we can architect these systems, that's one of the work that I did extensively at EPRI and also at General Motors in looking at isolation and segmentation, is how do we look at the authoritative data source, both from the data integrity perspective, but also from the lens of cybersecurity and perspective, and having reliable and standardized access, because you don't want to add more cost in data integration, etc. And we are seeing a new growth in artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, etc. So data and good data becomes very critical in leading those artificial intelligence work. And an area that is also not seen very widely for the DERs is in the cybersecurity compliance, right? And I mentioned the segmentation as well. Cybersecurity becomes very critical. Right now, DERs are not a big factor for looking from the cybersecurity as good as what you see the central generation plans, but it's just a matter of time as DER becomes 30%, 50%, 80% part of the grid, which is just the future. The cybersecurity, particularly looking from the critical infrastructure protection, what we call NERC-CEP rule, and segmentation of that. How we subject certain aspects of grid that provides those services with those cybersecurity compliance requirement, but not entire system, because you don't want an entire system. It's not only expensive to do those compliance requirements, but also add to the huge operational cost. So improving operational efficiency and segmentation. Again, this is work I did extensively at GM in designing those kind of systems and architecting those systems to make sure it's designed in the right way that can help utilities not only meet the compliance requirement, but also improve the cost efficiencies. So let's talk about now the value, right? So we've now seen what the DERs are and the value. I touched upon some of the challenges earlier. Let's expand upon those great challenges, particularly where the DR solutions are for everyone, right? And by the way, the survey questions are some of the challenges. I would love to hear from you as well. If I have missed any in these things that I would like to include, prioritized by your input, and I really appreciate that. We're looking from the grid challenges, right? I have touched upon the 4 earlier, but there are other ones as well that are very critical. I'm not trying to discount it. And I'll give you a couple of examples from the slides, not running through the slides, each one of these rows here. One is the grid interconnection that is becoming critically important. As the grid demand increases, right, demand driven by the electrification or data centers, artificial intelligence business, etc., the interconnection time to provide that load to new customers are just increasing. My own former company and some of the colleagues did the DR interconnection timelines and the delays that are happening. They range anywhere from 6 months, 1 year, to 5 years, 8 years. And that's quite a lot of business value that is lost, and especially when it's competitiveness. How can we leverage technology, standardized processes to improve those permitting needs? And then DRs can play a very critical role in that. So solutions that DRs can offer to the old problem, a new solution, but in a better way, I think is what we are kind of looking at. And the second example is data-driven decision making. Right. In the past, a lot of these decisions were based on forecasting the supply, forecasting the demand, and then ensuring that you're dispatching the supply to meet those demand needs. But there are tremendous opportunity to use the data, particularly with the real-time data, and integrating the IT OT systems data, from the customer side as well as from the grid side for better visibility. Forecasting is becoming important. Proactive risk mitigation, especially where the regions where there are, climate-related issues, whether it's a freeze happening in Texas or flood in New York or even, wildfires in California. How can we have a proactive data plays a very critical role in each one of those. So it just kind of gives you an idea that there is a solution. DERs can provide a solution, but it doesn't have to be a forced solution, right? The solution has to be a better alternative and a more cost-effective alternative than the status quo that exists out there. So this is what we are kind of looking at from the lens of how DERs can provide a better solution than what exists. I also like to touch upon the next topic that, that we're not just looking at the DER solution as in an isolation, right? DERs must also be looked at from the market phenomenon, right? What is the promising growth that looks for the DERs? Particularly if I look at 4 key DER technologies, the energy storage, distributed solar, demand response, and virtual power plant, all of these have very important role to play within the grid. So, and then of course the electric vehicle and charger as a new load, right? So the energy storage aspect is an important aspect because energy storage is something that provides many different streams of value, not only in the cost mitigation strategy, but also in the lens of how energy storage could be an important resource in addressing the intermittency from the renewables, right? So we are seeing a tremendous growth in the energy storage market, right? If you look at the last 5 years, from 22 to 27, energy storage market is expected to surge significantly, close to 500%, and the market value of 10 billion. If I look at solar in the same way, and the investments in the solar technologies are, increasing significantly, up close to 46%. Investment of the total DER is in the distributed solar side of things. And same could be said for demand response. This is the DOE VPP liftoff study. 80 to 160 gigawatts of new DR VPP can be available by 2030. And that translates to huge billions and billions of dollars of savings. So it's about looking at it from a very different lens. Rather than procuring new energy from adding more resources, you're creating a new business model without potentially losing revenue, but optimizing that through demand response and virtual power plant services, as opposed to regular wires alternative. We call this as sometimes non-wires alternatives as well. From the electric vehicles and charger, which is totally new load, it's a market phenomenon that's happening, how utilities can gear to provide not only just the demand, but also use these as a resource, as the distributed energy resources, particularly as the charging infrastructure that is required and is I would say is a intrinsic part of the overall EV adoption strategy is required. That is projected to exceed distributed growth solar and anticipated to reach 41 gigawatts by 2027 in next couple of years. So this all adds to the market adoption, but also leads towards the challenges that I just described, and the solutions that the DERs can provide. Let's look at from another angle as well, right? When we look at from the angle of the utility roles, particularly, when we look at from trusting the facts, because I'd like to always look from data. One of my mentor told me in the past is, hey, in God I trust, everyone else brings me data. Right. So I love seeing the data. I love seeing what is happening. We looked at it from two lenses. One lens is, how is utility business growing and the revenue, right? And where is the money going? First of all, a majority of the investment is happening in the distribution grid, which is where the distributed energy resources fit, and that is anticipated to grow. So if you see, $60 billion of investment in 2023 and 24, and around $57 billion in 2023. That's all in nominal dollars, by the way. There's a huge investment increase happening on the utility. But is the investment justified? That's the next slide that gives you. So there's a correlation there. And that correlation is basically telling you that the revenue of the utilities are also increasing. And particularly in the last 3 years, the revenue have, as much as last 2 decades, there's been a steady growth in revenue. But last 3 years, the revenue has increased quite a bit. And we are staring in 2024 a revenue of close to $500 billion in nominal dollars, particularly in the distribution systems and related technologies. And then comes a third correlation, which is what we are looking at the data. So is utility adequately staffed to provide these services? So all we see is that utilities in the last 3 years have increased significantly their staffing. Right. Particularly, we are seeing close to 600,000 staff, with the majority of them, close to 10% of it, is coming in the last 3 years. And that's quite significant when we look at from the lens of one of the challenges that I mentioned earlier, having staff expertise and competing with the IT sectors. So how can you continue to make create a value out of the investments and continue to grow the revenue, and while hiring the right set of staff? Each of these have axiomatic links, what we call the correlated links across, and the data shows very, very clear. And this is a great correlation, right? You want to make sure you have the right set of staff and grow the jobs, but those jobs are driven by great revenue, and that revenue is driven by the good investments that the utilities are making. So there's a tremendous amount of correlation we see in each one of these data points that we are seeing. So now let's focus on the applications, right? What DERs can do to the electric utilities. So when we look from the DERs, everybody talks about California, right? It's not because I'm there. It's because California has been one of the leaders in driving the sustainable adoption and the grid modernization work, including DER adoption. Right. So when we look at from that, and again, it's not meant to be a confirmation bias, these applications, it's meant to show what is out there, in terms of DER drivers and numbers. There are a lot of drivers, right? There is the generation electrification that's happening, particularly with solar and wind. There's the transportation electrification happening with zero emission vehicles, ZEV mandates. Then there's a flexible interconnection, new innovation that is happening in terms of being able to provide the interconnection or connect the load to the grid in a very expedited manner. And finally, managing the climate, particularly the wildfire risk in California. If you go elsewhere, a very different set of risk. And all of that is driving adoption of DERs. If you look at the DER technology table at the bottom there, whether it's solar, wind, energy storage, electric vehicle charging station, there's a tremendous amount of growth, close to 36 gigawatts of energy, solar power being deployed in the country because of the large, sunshine that the state is fortunate to have, of which, half of it is driven by the utility megawatt scale or the grid-sited installation, right? So how do we manage this, is an important aspect. And then we're seeing wind energy also growing, although it's 1/5 or 1/6 the size of what the solar is. Then all of this requires energy storage driven by the energy storage mandates, right, around close to 11 gigawatts of energy storage. And then new decarbonization initiative, particularly driven by the electrification of the transportation sector and the charging infrastructure that are necessary. We have close to 2 million EVs registered right now, and around 150,000 public and shared chargers. All of these needs expanded infrastructure growth and EV growth and the demand growth. How do we manage these from the utility lens, right? So if you look at from the DER adoptions, what utilities are doing and the services to really ensure that they can continue to operate grid reliably and affordably and sustainably, utilities like PG&E and SC are doing flexible interconnection programs. And those flexible interconnection programs, are accepting, providing limited load than what's required with the guarantee that the curtailments can happen, so that they can alleviate some of the congestion and leverage the hosting capacity that's available immediately. All of this leads to increased speed of adoption without significant impact to the business operation. So it's a great innovation, in my view, of what the utilities are doing out here. The other one is on the climate side of the things, particularly the wildfire-induced outages, the microgrid resilience, whether those microgrid resilience is provided through sensing capabilities and automatic, curtailment, but also from the lens of new resources like energy storage, resources long duration, and battery energy storage, providing resources, and new electric cars. Utilities just recently announced some of the ways that the electric cars' batteries can be used as a stationary storage resource. So to power the house as and when they need it. And then, of course, we need advanced grid management, right? Fault location, isolation, and service restoration, the Blizzard technologies, distribution management systems, and DERMS, or distributed energy resource management systems. All are new technologies that are very important that needs to be added so that we can visualize and get a real-time view of what's happening with the grid and respond to those faults, particularly with the climate changes. But again, this is not all about California. It's also some of the key metrics are also relevant across other major states in the country. So if you look at New York, Massachusetts, Texas, and Hawaii, each of these states are doing many different leveraging many different aspects of the DERs. So each of the states are doing it. It needs DERs and have a DER strategy. That they're doing it differently. Some state may have priority of demand flexibility, what you can see it in New York with community solar, right? And if you look at Hawaii, solar as well as energy storage pairing becomes very critical because of a lot of sunshine, etc. So I think from that lens, there is a tremendous amount of national phenomenon that is gathering momentum in adoption of DERs and is being used extensively. But there are two very important factors that are driving this, and this is the data. The top data from the levelized cost of energy is the analysis and number crunching that I did. And the second data on the bottom in terms of the time it's required, development timelines required to have each of these regular generation resources available to the customers is from the Solar Energy Industries Association. If you look at the levelized cost of energy, I can run the same numbers against nuclear plants or natural gas plants, but this is one is looking, the blue one line is looking from the lens of levelized cost of the coal versus $9 per megawatt hour metric. And on the and the teal or the green one is looking from the solar levelized cost of energy. While almost like 10 years ago, we started with almost similar levelized cost of energy for solar and coal. If you look at 2024, the levelized cost of solar is almost 20% or less than that of a coal plant, although the coal plant levelized cost has remained the same over last decade, the solar is increasingly becoming less. So the cost is a very important factor, and how much time does it require to install is another important factor, right? So if you look at solar photovoltaics and the batteries, these take the least amount of time, 2 to 3 years, or in fact, sometimes even less than 2 years, versus the coal, it might take anywhere from 6 to 7 years. And there are a lot of factors that goes into it, whether it's a new construction or permitting, which state and which region it is, etc. But the data is very clear that it takes much longer to do that. So DERs have this benefit of both cost and time value. And this is what I meant by the business and market forces driving and not the politics. So if you see this is great for business, right? If the utility is in the business of ensuring that you can manage the grid service and provide electricity at a cost-effective way, in a very expedited way, the DERs can provide that kind of a service. So from the lens of which utilities are doing, right? And this is the data. This is not my own data on the left side. This is coming from Wood Mackenzie. A lot of innovations in different states that are doing this, right? Where we are, who is leading this, and not all utilities being the same. So we understand that. And so you can see some of this in the northeastern states, the Midwestern state, as well as the western part of the United States, playing a very critical role, driven by the renewable energy mandates, zero emission requirements, carbon emission requirements, right? So 29 states, for example, and DC have implemented renewable portfolio standards across the country, and close to 60 utilities, both regulated and deregulated, have committed to the emission reductions. And in all of these things, DER provide a key value proposition, particularly from looking not just from the hardware asset, but also the software, how this can lead to other corollary benefits on adding more renewables generation into the grid. So let's look at one big, I would say, highlight or area that is getting a lot of attention these days, and that's the artificial intelligence and data centers requirement, right? 3 very important metrics. One is load forecast. Traditionally, we are expecting, just from the lens of adding more data center, more electrification, 4.7% growth. So this is different from around 1.3% the utilities have traditionally seen in the past, to a significant 4x jump in the demand, overall demand, by the way. And if you forecast, that's even going to be more because of where the data centers and some of the electrification with the EVs, et cetera, are growing. But the regional in the center is equally important. This might nationally see a very different picture. When you look at from the regional perspective, this is very impactful, particularly with areas like Dominion Energy in Virginia, where you have a majority of the data centers and large data center load. They are forecasting 58% increase by 2035, right? That's quite a bit. And when we look at the interconnection timelines and delays, it can take up to 4 years, because these are, I worked extensively on the data centers in the very early stages, almost 15 years ago, when nobody was looking at data centers as a grid service, as a flexibility service. There are published articles on that particular one, and Duke recently did a very recent study, and they cited some of my work from that time. How data centers can be a very important play a role in the flexible interconnection needs to be looked at, particularly when the transmission lead times are up to 8 years, and DERs can significantly lower those. The VPP and DR services can significantly lower those. The other angle is also looking from not just providing a load to the artificial intelligence services or data centers, but also looking from the how AI can itself provide intelligence and solutions to the energy industry, right? What we'll call leveraging AI industry for power related. So that's where the data analytics plays a very critical role. And this is my LBNL study from my former colleagues, where they have forecast 2028 in next 3 years, 6.7 to 12%, anywhere 74 to 132 gigawatts of total electricity use is going to be from data centers. And that's different from around 4.4 we have currently, almost 3x jump if you look at the higher band of this, and regional impact we've already seen. This is where DERs can play a very critical role, particularly with availability and affordability. And an incremental build and modularity, I think, is very critical. Flexible interconnection playing a very critical role there. Organized energy markets and flexibility, particularly what we're seeing at PGMR, Carter, CalISO, etc. And then an operational plan project, particularly with the power purchase agreement, co-investments that are happening on-site generation, some of the things that we're seeing with nuclear as well as natural gas is equally important, but DERs can also play a very critical role, both from the battery storage, solar, as well as long duration energy storage. So all of these is where grid connected DERs can play a very important role in addressing some of the most talked about topic in the industry, not just in the utility industry, but also in the information technology industry. And that comes back to my last slide today before I address the key takeaways. And that is, one of my objectives was also to look at what role Celerity can play. Again, I'm a data guy. I just don't want to take something and fit within that and say, hey, it works. But trying to support expertise and staffing and looking from the lens of the Celerity, where I was providing service. As I mentioned, the first objective was to show the DER value for the utilities, and second one is also to have a collaborative approach with you, and the areas that we can provide collaborative approaches. I looked at many different aspects of Celerity services and said, in knowing DERs and where DERs can fit, where are some of those areas? Again, I won't go into each one of these, but I'll highlight a couple of those, right? In areas where I think are very critical, particularly with the DER data for IT/OT systems and integration, right? So utilities have many different aggregator services, SIDRM services, ADMS services, meter data management services, and now we have DERs coming into the picture, both from the grid side as well as the customer sided. How do we provide those data integration solutions and expertise and improving forecasting, address some of the risk mitigation with wildfires or other, climate related events. The second one is to look at from the interconnection side of things, right? So when we talk about the interconnection requirements, right, those are all increasing, but there is a potential that we could support on creating standardized processes and helping interconnection requirements, reviewing and evaluating vendor products and technologies, right? Coming from a neutral stance, coming from someone who is not a vendor. Of course, if we go to some vendor and ask them, how is the technology? They're always going to say, hey, you have the best technologies that's out there. Is it really the best? Is it something that you want to have, or some other better technologies that exist out there? Looking at it from that lens is something that we can provide extensively help. And this, or what my analysis basically comes down to in a nutshell, is there are a lot of work that Celerity already does and have expertise, both from staffing perspective and expertise perspective, that can be leveraged for distributed energy resources to guide utilities towards a sustainable future. And my last slide. So if I have to bring all of this together in 4 or 5 key points, what does it look? We started with the question, and not so much about will utilities adopt, but how will utilities adopt to the right, to DERs. How they could be integrated to the grid. Some of the areas that I see, from this analysis, and I would love to kind of, have a more interactive discussion with you after Tony. And again, feel free to send your questions as well as the survey. There is, what are the priorities areas, right, for DERs? We see that the adaptation, hardening, and resilience requirement, what we call AHR application to DR, pretty immense. Okay, data management analytics. On the area of IT/OT integration is a great opportunity. The interconnection delays and compliance to states' energy regulatory needs. So regulations are being put onto the utilities to say, hey, you need to expedite and you need to standardize the processes. That's where we can play a very critical role. We do see that the DRs are integral for in the future of the grid, particularly from the affordability and sustainability of the utility future. I do see that the DER strategy can address a lot of demand and also the localized grid impact that we're seeing from regions such as electrification, transportation sectors, EVs, as well as the data centers for artificial intelligence. And by the way, we're not talking data centers of, in my time, so 1 megawatt or 10 megawatts used to be huge. We're talking at gigawatt scale. Just the scale and the magnitude is pretty immense. And then we talk about the return on investment. is very critical, particularly looking at IT/OT technologies, expertise that are necessary from the staffing perspective, questioning of whether you need to build the technology or just operate technology or license it from somewhere else. How can that we could be, playing a very critical role, but also how DRs can address a very important gap there, and the data integration becomes very important from the services and the software side of things. And another thing, and finally, is Celerity can support and collaborate with utilities where you need DR expertise and staffing, particularly focusing on some of the challenges that we are seeing on the grid and the solutions that the DRs can provide. With that, I kind of wrap up my formal, portion of my talk, and I'll pass it on to Tony for his slide. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Rish. As always, I learn something new every time we have a conversation or I get to listen to one of your presentations. So thank you. I don't know that I can keep up your pace, but I'll try. Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Marabi. As Bob mentioned at the beginning, I was fortunate to have a 35-year career at PG&E in a variety of operational leadership and technology roles, and now I lead Celerity's Business Integration Services team. So what is a DER-centric future? When you think about utilities, you realize they're fundamentally asset management companies at their core, responsible for managing and maintaining, optimizing critical infrastructure assets to ensure the reliable production delivery of energy to the customers. As DERs become more prevalent, utilities must rethink traditional asset management approaches. And this shift requires a combination of data-driven decision-making, integrated systems, and a digital transformation to maintain the reliability, resilience, and efficiency. Utilities face key challenges when integrating DERs into their asset management frameworks. Some of those include, incorporating non-utility owned assets or behind-the-meter DERs that require a new work and asset management strategy that treats BTM resources as dynamic grid assets. There's the need for seamless DER integration with core systems such as your ERP, your GIS, CRM, and SCADA systems for full EAM lifecycle visibility and real-time coordination between control centers, work and asset management, and your distributed energy resource management systems, or DERMS. You need the ability to optimize your work and asset management for DER operations to improve scheduling, tracking, and remote diagnostics for distributed assets when performing field service and maintenance. So to successfully adapt a DER-centric landscape, utilities should adopt a structured approach to asset management. At Celerity, we specialize in 4 key areas that drive utility transformation. The first is program strategy, where we can provide strategic planning for DER integration and work and asset management modernization using our expertise in regulatory alignment and large-scale utility transformation programs. The second is business systems integrations, where we can look at seamlessly integrating your core systems, your ERP, CRM, GIS, and your FSM systems to improve the overall work and asset management efficiency. You can have the ability to track and manage DERs like solar panels or batteries as part of a utility's asset portfolio, and integrating DER data with work and asset management systems for better planning and maintenance optimization. It can help standardize processes and streamline workflows across workforce management, field operations, and customer engagement to improve efficiencies. Can ensure control center, field operations, and customer service teams share real-time DER data for better decision-making. Third area is data management, where we can provide expertise in data governance frameworks, ERP transitions, and advanced analytics to ensure data integrity, migration, and governance for DER assets. And the last is technology system consulting, where we can advise on system selection, process optimization, and emerging technologies. We can look at implementing tools like Scanavio for process improvement. We can evaluate and recommend the appropriate field service management solutions to allow for that real-time coordination to dispatch technicians for DER installations, repairs, or maintenance, and also mobile access for field technicians so they can access DER data on mobile devices for greater efficiency. So to shift to a DER-centric utility model demands a transformation in asset management practices. By integrating the digital tools, predictive analytics, and real-time grid coordination, utilities can efficiently manage both traditional infrastructure and decentralized energy resources. At Celerity, we bring decades of experience from working in and with regulated utilities, and we're committed to helping utilities navigate this transformation by providing some strategic consulting, system integration expertise, and data-driven solutions. So if you'd like to learn more or discuss how we can support your initiatives, please feel free to reach out. And I want to thank you for your time today, and we can open it up for questions.
Good deal. Gentlemen, really great job. I mean, Tony, I remember when I first met you about 2 years ago now. One of the first conversations we had as we were getting to know each other was we both use the same terminology. We're essentially the cog in the machine that between people, processes, technology, and data. And this DER initiative and the market and how important this is fits right into that. And trying to simplify it from my own marketing mind. But really nice job, guys, of clarifying, defining, and really simplifying the process of a sometimes misunderstood, newer type of approach to distributed energy resources. So really nice job on the content. I do have 3 or 4 questions I'd like to run by you guys before we wrap things up. And this can go out to either speaker, whoever feels best to answer it. During the presentation early on, you listed off a lot of utility grid challenges. Is there any particular one of those challenges that you feel is the biggest challenges for utilities to address?
Boy, that's a great question, Bob. I mean, yeah, I don't think we can see the challenges from its isolation itself. But one of the things that I can tell you I haven't seen in the last 25 years in the utility is the huge growth in the demand, right? This kind of inflection point I see in overall electrification all coming together, particularly with the load growth that we're seeing in the data centers. I remember still LBNL work we did a long time ago where we looked at the data center projected growth. We're seeing 1.5% to 2% of total energy used by the data centers. Now it's 4.4, and it's projected to grow up to 12%, right? That kind of just one particular sector is kind of multiplied by other sectors that are happening on the building electrification, particularly for the heating and cooling or your cooking, water heating, etc. And then also by the electrification of the transportation sector, which is not necessarily a grid sector, but an important aspect of the decarbonization. So I think that collective, I wouldn't want to call it a tsunami, but a collective, concoction of all these 3 load growth, I think is a very important challenge. And by that, supported significantly by the innovation that is happening in the DER space, particularly with the storage costs falling, technology improvements happening on the PV side of the things as well on the electrification. And another important aspect on the data side as also. I think we are underappreciating the data and what we can do with the data to forecast and create value to the customers, and not just understanding the value of what the DERs can provide to the utilities, but to the customers as well. So I think from that lens, developing these, forecasting models and the quantitative models that allows utility to better manage the grid using the data that they would have, I think some of the areas I see as key challenges that DERs can potentially address.
Excellent. No, it's a really good answer. I appreciate the detail on that, Rish. Kind of dovetailing off that last question, I don't remember the 4 markets or sectors from earlier on the presentation, but is there any one of the 4 sectors you feel will take the longest time for utility organizations to embrace and comply with?
Yeah, one area I would say the staffing. Staffing has always been a challenge. Even we see that in the IT sector, right? If you look at the amount of staffing and the challenges that the IT sector is facing in these expertise, particularly driven by the artificial intelligence growth, is just phenomenal. We had seen that in the past. Now we are transforming that challenges to the utility industry as well. We know traditionally the utility industries cannot compete in terms of the salary and in terms of what the value that the IT industry gives to the staff. But there is also, that's where somebody like Celerity and consulting businesses can fit in. I think that's going to be a very important challenge because you want to ensure that you are going to meet the demand and you can harness this innovation. And some of the utilities are already doing it extensively. But at the same time, you have the right set of staff and expertise to be able to do that. In my view, I think that's the most underappreciated part. Of course, we talked about DER and DR adoption. That's taken for granted. But I think in terms of being able to have investments and the revenue correlate to the increase in the staffing, but the right set of the staffing with the expertise, I think will be an important area that I think I would like to highlight, for the utilities.
Good deal. And then that kind of opens up another question that coming directly from me on this one. Having worked, both of you, having worked as both employees at large utility organizations, as consultants, and now with, for example, Solarity, what do you believe if there's a client or utility client that's looking for to partner with a provider of these services, what's the most important attribute or benefit that that third party should have in your opinion?
I think, yeah, again, that's it's also a very big question. I'll try to see how can I simplify that. I think one of the area is having these third parties fit within the utility business operations, right? Traditionally, if you look at the utility business, because of the electricity being critical infrastructure, it's heavily regulated and there are a lot of compliance requirements. When you look at from the IT industry and the timelines and the technology speed at which that grow are just very high because there is relatively less regulatory requirements on the IT industry. Where does these two industries come together, right? I've seen that working on the startup side, on the private sector side, as well as on the public side. One of the big frustration of the private sector is the utility sectors are not growing as fast as we would like to. Our investment takes a lot of time to recoup. I would rather put that investment in something else. We have seen the failed strategies from Google, PowerMeter, et cetera, and then from the previous IT companies like Cisco, et cetera. So that kind of a correlation between what the expectation of the IT industrial third parties is versus the utilities need to be matched. I think some of the utilities are taking steps to do that, but that needs to be addressed, more extensively so that they may not be one side, but there has to be some kind of a compromise that need to be attained before you can start saying that I'm modernizing my infrastructure, I'm upgrading my business and hiring the right set of staff to be able to do those, provide those solutions.
Excellent. And that kind of dovetails into our fourth and last question, gentlemen. Are there any particular challenge that you foresee that DERS can address in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think DERS have a critical role to play. I think, when we look at from the lens of the time and cost, two very important metrics, right? Both of those are very big advantages. And the third advantage I don't talk about is there is a continued improvement in reducing the development timeline of these DERS deployment and coming them online. We're also being able to reduce the cost. One of my good friend, Michael Bernard, did his analysis, where we're looking at the levelized cost of energy from the energy storage coming to $66 a kilowatt hour with CATL technology from China. If that is going to be there, it's going to be kind of a game changer if you're able to bring it to the United States and bring that cost efficiencies in our operations. So from that lens, I think, bringing them together, understanding those collectively, but from the lens of the utility, will be very critical factors. I think DERS are the future. It's the extent to which DERS can be and how utilities can be ready, looking from the future, not so much about the future of the utility, but looking from the utility of the future, quoting from my Ernie Moniz, former energy secretary, who said this term. I think it will be an important challenge, which I think the utilities need to take a look from. Yeah.
No, it's an excellent last point. I really resonate with that last statement you made about the utility of the future versus the DER of the future. It's a bigger picture than we might be looking at right now. All right, so with that, let's go to the last slide, guys. We'll sum everything up here and thank everybody for showing up to today's show. Again, thank you everybody that came to the presentation today. We really appreciate your time and input and questions that were sent in advance. As mentioned, I did post the 2-question survey in the chat box. If you have one last chance, click on that. It only takes 15, 30 seconds to take it. It really helps us kind of align our strategies and services with what you specifically need at a given utility or elsewhere. So greatly appreciate it in advance. As I mentioned earlier in the show, I will send out another email campaign to you guys tomorrow around noon Eastern time, I believe, with a link to our post-webinar landing page where you can access and download the slides in PDF format. You can take a quick survey and let us know how we did, or any areas for improvement or additional topics you might like us to speak on. And probably most importantly, to be able to listen and share the recorded webinar, because there was a lot of really powerful information packed into a 50-minute presentation window. And then, as always, stay tuned for additional educational focused webinars from Celerity. We've got 2 or 3 topics we're throwing around for the month of April. Late in the month, we typically run these on the last week on Wednesdays of the month. So stay tuned for some more marketing campaigns to invite you to the next education webinar coming to a theater near you soon. So again, thank you to our speakers and to our audience, and we hope to see you on another webinar soon. Take care.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, everyone.